as they come in. So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming along today to part 2, using NABERS to estimate your office emissions baseline. I'm a new face. I'm Annie, the Greater Metro and Regional Program Manager for CitySwitch, and I'm based out of the City of Melbourne. I look after all our signatories outside of Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney and North Sydney. And I do invite you to pop your name and which business you're from in the chat, and would also love to see which city or country you're based in. And please note this session is being recorded, and we will run for around 45 minutes. So just an acknowledgement of country. So the City of Melbourne respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pays respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We are committed to our reconciliation journey because at its heart, reconciliation is about strengthening relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples for the benefit of all of Victoria, where I am based. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work from today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating. Always was, always will be. So today's, as I said before, session will run for 45 minutes. I'm going to take you through a quick welcome and some CitySwitch context before we move on to our guest speaker, Zoe Baker from NABERS, to run us through an indicative NABERS rating. Today's session will be interactive, so as you can see now, your video and mics are on, and we would encourage you to ask questions. At the end of this session, we will answer your questions submitted at registration. So last month we launched our Pathway to Net Zero. The pathway has 7 focus areas and 16 actions on it. It provides the basic structure for office-based business to get to the net zero, including all important internal engagement and capacity building. The first step is, of course, to establish your baseline and measure your business emissions. Hence our session today on how to use the NABERS indicative rating tool to understand your office scope 1 and 2 emissions. So last week we held part 1, scope 1 and 2 explained, which has been recorded and available on our YouTube channel now for future reference. And today is part 2, using NABERS to estimate your office emissions baseline. So the focus is on NABERS and how to use the online indicative rating tool to give you an idea of your emissions baseline for your office. It's a simple calculator that will spit out scope 1 and 2 emissions data. And then if you're lucky enough to be in Sydney or able to travel in, we are hosting a workshop on how to establish your scope 3 emissions on Thursday, 24th of November. And then lastly, to wrap it all up, at the end of the month, we will distribute some beginner guides to cover all the content we've gone over. So now I'd like to introduce Zoe Baker. Zoe is the sector lead of NABERS, and she'll be taking you through today's session. So I'll hand it over to you, Zoe. Stop sharing my screen.
Thanks very much, Annie, and hi everybody. Good to see some familiar faces and be back in the CitySwitch gang. Thanks for the intro. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Zoe Baker. I've had a long relationship with CitySwitch, been around for a long time, and I'm a sector lead at NABERS, which means one of those sort of customer-facing roles in NABERS. I look after a bunch of the more commercial sectors in the tools that we offer, including the office tools, but a couple of the other commercial ones as well. So joining Annie to acknowledge country, and it's great to see a bunch of additional acknowledgements from where you're from, joining around the country. I'm on Gadigal land today, and I extend a recognition and an acknowledgement of all the places that we're joining from and the Indigenous leadership in those places. So NABERS, I feel like if you're attending this session, you're familiar with it to some degree. So I'm going to go through this reasonably quickly. As Annie said, we've got this meeting or this session set up as a meeting. So I do really invite you guys to butt in if you have questions along the way. Just turn your microphone on and say, hey, Zoe, what does that mean? Or, you know, what do we do about this? I'm really happy for that to be the way that we run this session, because I don't want it to feel like I'm just talking at you the whole time. So anything you need to know, I might have a slide on it coming. We might have it in the Q&A session coming up if it's something that warrants a little bit more conversation. But yeah, as we go, please just pipe up if you have questions. So NABERS ratings, what are they? It is a language to talk about the performance of your building or your space. It is a language around sustainability, so it's talking about your efficiency of the office, and we'll be talking mostly about office tenancy ratings. But what it does is benchmark the performance of that space against what's happening in the rest of the market for buildings and sites like yours. So it's a star rating, nice and easy to understand, just like the sticker on your front of your fridge. It's a scheme that's robust. It's been around for over 25 years, reasonably inexpensive to do. And as I said, just it is a comparison between buildings. So it's not just a raw measure of your consumption. It's benchmarking that against data that we have collected and created an algorithm that places it for a building or a site like yours, the same sort of size, the same sort of use. How good is the performance? How good is your energy consumption? So we've got a range of different rating types: energy, water, waste, indoor environment, and carbon neutral pathway. Those are available to varying degrees for the different buildings that we have ratings for. And you'll see on the slide, I haven't even had time to add our warehouses and cold stores onto the site, but that's one of our newest tools, just launched last month. So, you know, for offices that have been around for the longest, we've got a certified rating for all of those measures. For some of the others, we have sort of pathways for it, or waste in particular. We've got a sort of couple of different tiers of measuring waste. So yeah, we're expanding all the time. We've got new tools coming out and covering more and more of the building sector in Australia. Why, like, what's the point of a NABERS rating? As the kind of title for this webinar or lunch and learn session is, it is about that benchmarking and that baselining. That's one of the key functions and uses, but it is also to track that performance. And we've seen in the office sector really impressive results. Kind of our director says, you know, these numbers are the best in the world in terms of tracking building improvements over time. And although for base building offices, the NABERS tool has been compulsory or mandatory in terms of building disclosure at the point of sale or lease. So you've got a lot of offices coming in because they have to get rated. We're also seeing improvements in those buildings and a similar improvement in the more voluntary tools like shopping centres. I should create one of these slides for tenancy so you can see what happens in the tenant space as well. But we see sectors who measure managing better and improving over time. It's the takeout from that slide. To the tenancy rating, which is what we're all here to discuss. And I know that one of the questions that we'll come to at the end is sort of, if you're doing a base building rating, what's the point of a tenancy rating? And that, to kind of preempt that question, we can talk about it a little bit more in the Q&A. The tenancy rating is measuring the performance of the space that you occupy, where the base building rating is occupying all the common areas and is rating all the common areas in the building. So that's really about what the landlord has control over. The tenancy rating is about what you as the tenant has control over. And you may have come in and done some fit out work, and that fit out work may be considerably better than the efficiency of the base building. It also could be a little bit worse if your interior designers have put in some really beautiful lighting fixtures, but not thought about the energy efficiency at the time of the fit out. So it is, those are different measures, and those are really important if you as an organization want to talk about the space that you're occupying. The base building rating is a great sort of shortcut to how well is the building being rated, how well is the building being run. So that rating is useful for that. But your tenancy rating is about your performance in that space, how you're using the electricity and or other energy sources in your space. So tenancy ratings, again, they're robust, they're reasonably inexpensive, and it's a benchmark that directly compares your office to other offices like it. How's it used? Straight up comparison. That might be, I've got a number of different offices around the country, and I want to know which ones are running better, which ones have better fit outs. How can I bring the kind of raise the floor across all of my sites and continue to improve? It might be about better management, obviously. What and where have we got issues with performance, and what can we improve? And also you might have internal rating requirements or ways that you want to demonstrate the performance of your organization, and being able to show your good management of the assets that you occupy or the assets you might own. And those can be really useful in that investor conversation as well as the recognition conversation. And this is a really good thing for sustainability managers or sustainability teams to think about. This is if you're going to it, especially an accredited NABERS rating where you can really advertise that rating, that's a really good way to get recognition for the hard work that you've done in your spaces to improve the efficiency. This is what an accredited NABERS rating gives you: an energy certificate with a bit of your company name here, editing, and a report with some detailed emissions figures and bits and pieces. So this is all obviously pertaining to an accredited rating. We'll get onto the indicative stuff in a second as well, but whether you're doing indicative or accredited, it fits into this measure and manage model. If we don't know what's happening in the space, it's really hard to improve it over time. It's really hard to know whether we have the upgrades we might have made, or the behavior changes that we might have put in place, or the timers or switches. It's hard to talk about whether those have had impact if we're not doing that measurement over time. It doesn't have to be every single year, but taking an accredited rating might not be useful for you guys every single year. I say that even though it's literally my job to sell NABERS ratings, but work with what's useful for your business. Measuring in some format every single year is going to be really useful for you. It allows you to track that performance over time. And that's where our indicative tool might be a really useful way to sort of fill that gap or help you get on the board in terms of measure and manage. But this is a tried and true method for getting better. How much does it cost? A couple of cool things in here. So the cost is really, the way NABERS ratings work is there's an accredited assessor who's certified by the NABERS program to carry out assessments. So there's the lodgement fee and the assessor fees, and those really, the lodgement fee is set. The assessor fee really depends on the size and complexity of your site, and your assessor will give you a quote for that. And it's always useful to go to a couple of assessors to get a quote from them. And you do get a 50% discount for the over 1,000 square meter tenancies. So that's a good saving of $600 or so every year and every site. And while we're here, let me give another plug for my first time rating offer. Unfortunately, this one's only available in New South Wales, but if you've got any tenancies that have not been rated before, we'd love to support you with some funding. And we've got especially a regional booster for that as well. So there's support there if you want to get ratings, if you want to get accredited ratings, and you do have a site in New South Wales, hit me up and I'll talk you through a little bit more of the funding details on that. And while I have your attention, I just want to give another heads up on the renewable energy indicator change that will come in place next year. Look out for an invite for that, but that's really about recognizing better the different forms of renewable energy that you might be using in your tenancy. There's a few changes to what that means for your accredited NABERS rating, but keep an eye out for invites and information that'll come through next year. So onto the tenancy rating kind of data, etc. And please, again, interrupt if you've got questions through this process. But I thought I'd sort of talk through some of the information, and Emily sent out in the sort of preparation emails for this session a bunch of the homework. So hopefully you're all sitting there ready with some facts and figures ready to go. But I thought it'd be a good idea to sort of talk through what that means and why is it important. So your energy, obviously that's the sort of key thing that we're measuring when we're doing an indicative energy rating or an accredited energy rating. We want to know how well your tenancy is performing in terms of energy. So this seems pretty self-explanatory. How do you find that information out? That can be a little bit trickier than it seems. I don't know if anyone's encountered any hiccups while they've tried to find their energy data in preparation for this session. But one of the questions is sometimes, well, where is the energy bill? I've never seen it. I don't actually know who in my business has it. And tracking that down can sometimes be a little bit tricky. Does it sit with the finance team? Is this sitting with a finance team that might actually be in a different site to me? And at the point when I'm going to them and asking them, hey, can we see these energy bills? They're saying, why do you want to see this? What's this for? I'm not sure which drawer it's in. So from that first kind of foray into measuring your performance, you might have some hurdles to overcome. The slide that I've got up here is one of the tabs from the kind of energy spreadsheet that Emily sent around in the preparation for this meeting. That's a really useful tool that CitySwitch has developed. That's really to help you find and collect that information, and to do that consistently, so that at the point where you're ready to do an indicative rating, for example, you're not scrambling around and trying to find that information and find out where it is. So this can be really useful. It's a spreadsheet that you can either put in your monthly data or just your quarterly figures, and that will give you the annualized figures that you'll need for the NABERS rating. If you're getting an accredited rating, the assessor will need to see all of those bills, because they need to verify that they are the third party that has verified all the information. For the purposes of an indicative rating, you can sort of collect that over time, and this is useful stuff to keep track of throughout the year as well. The tenancy details that you need to kind of fill out and know also for an accredited rating. How big is your office? How many hours of the week are we actually in there doing work? And the kind of explanation for these, and again, please ask any questions along the way. It's really about how many hours of the week is that office comfortable, which means you'll have, especially if you've got your own air conditioning or HVAC systems, it's really about how many hours of the week is that comfortable for people to work in. And so the kind of shortcut to think about is probably when more than 20% of your staff are sitting in the office. But for the purposes of an indicative rating, you might want to be a little bit flexible with that. And if you're doing an accredited rating, they're going to be asking a whole lot more detailed questions and looking at your lease agreements and things like that. And then how many computers are normally switched on. What that's really asking is how many people are in the space, and what would we expect the energy use to be in terms of the air conditioning to a certain extent, and that has a bit more impact when you've got your own air conditioning systems, obviously, but also how much energy do we expect those computers to be using. So there are a kind of a question around under COVID conditions, and if we've got more people working from home, and if we've got more people doing a flexible working arrangement. Again, that CitySwitch tracker document that that Emily shared around, that's a really useful way to keep track of that, because we know that that has fluctuated, and in different states that's fluctuated in different ways. You might have had periods where you've had outbreaks and more people working from home, or you've had your organization might have been more cautious or less cautious, or it just had different practices and different habits from your staff at different times. So again, this can be really useful for you to sort of have a better idea of how many people were actually there and coming into the office. Now, we know that that there have been a lot of disruptions over the last couple of years, and from NABERS' perspective, we know that that hasn't gone away. We know that there's a lot of flexible work arrangements that will be put into place as people kind of come into a what's the future of work in a post-COVID world or a semi-COVID world. And we've done a bit of work on the COVID impacts. You can check it out on our website. That's really more focused on the base building and that level of data. So we've looked at a couple of things. We've engaged with the sector at the beginning of COVID to work out how were we going to address this fluctuated occupancy. What I would like to say to you all is, if things are changing in your tenancies, and if you are having ongoing or future different expectations of occupancy, it is super useful for us at NABERS to know what that looks like for you, and to know kind of what your plans are for that. So if that's stuff that's coming into place for you, we want to make sure that our adjustments to our rules and adjustments to our calculations can take that into account, so that if there's something different happening in the market, that we know how to address that better in our algorithm. So the occupancy, as I go back to that slide, that will help you if you have had fluctuations. Otherwise, especially on the indicative tool, there's a sort of default occupancy that will apply. I think it says it on the website, but you can use those defaults.
Zoe, can I interrupt? And
yes, please.
A question for you, but also really for a question for the businesses that are here. Does everybody have accurate occupancy data? Is there someone responsible in your business or building who's letting you know how many are in the office each day, or an average each week?
Alex, you're nodding. How does that work for you guys?
Well, I'm the facilities manager, so I look after and also the policeman in the building. So I know who's in at what time and which offices are being used and all that sort of stuff. Just we're in the disability sector, so we have to sort of keep a tab on what's sort of going on. So the information that we were sort of asked to, that Emily sort of asked us to provide, I've got accurate to the nearest kilowatt hour of electricity and usage and all that sort of stuff, because I'm sort of responsible for that area. So and I can tell you who's in on which day, and I mean, obviously you can't sort of get that exact, but I mean, we can sort of work out a weekly figure, which just sort of happens to be 50 hours a week anyway for occupancy and a number of computers. So yeah, as far as, you know, the question concerned, I've responsible for that information and sort of got it on hand right now.
Amazing.
Imogen, you've said no. What? How does it work for you guys? If you don't.
Sorry, it's just a bit tricky because we ended up doing initially it was a hybrid work arrangement where you had set days that you'd work in the office or from home, and you had to nominate, and it was on file. And then they've amended that to be flexible, so everyone kind of just works wherever they want on a day-to-day basis, and we just have swipe card access into our offices. So we could probably contact security and get that data, but it would, I'm going to hazard that that's going to be quite a painful process for the 5 offices that we have. Around the computer, like number of computers that we have, I know IT would have those records, so that'd be fine to get. And our electricity bills and stuff like that, I have most of those already, and I wouldn't have too much difficulty getting that information. But yeah, the occupancy data would be the big hurdle for us.
Yeah. And look, that is to be expected while we're still in this what does flexible working look like for a lot of organizations. So there's a couple of shortcuts you can do for that. Just next time you're in the office, do a quick head count. Doesn't have to be super accurate for the purposes of the assessment, but because what we're trying to calculate is how many computers are on during the day. Potentially the information from IT that might be counting more sort of how many computers are on in the system, which would be counting people from home. But there's
that's tricky as well, though, because just because someone's not at the desk doesn't mean the computer's not on. Not in a we don't turn things off sense, but we have town planners, landscape architects, urban designers, and graphic designers. And so we farm the rendering across multiple machines, not just that individual user's machine. Right. So it's really tricky getting that data, as I found out when I tried to earlier this year. And I was like, how am I meant to like improve our use if I can't get like even a switch off campaign happening?
Yeah, super, super hard in those kind of circumstances. So in terms of estimating a rating, if you want to go through that exercise, you can use that default figure, but because you know that you've got sort of different occupancy, it's kind of tricky to give you an exact advice on how to get that information, but head count is probably the easiest. Just a bit of a quick walk around the floor, bam, 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 how many people, are here today? And if the person isn't standing at their desk at the exact moment you're walking around, but you can see that their bags are there and bits and pieces are there, you count it. And if they're clearly, not working, then we're just looking for a sort of figure. And if you get an accredited rating, your assessor will talk you through that process with a bit more detail.
Zoe, it's Will from the ANMF. Yeah. Just a really quick, probably side throw on that one, not for us, but we've got a tenant in this building that each of their staff remote desktops into their space. So which means their computers are operating whether they're in the building or not. So they're still stuck in 1975 when it comes to how their systems work. But that's something important, I think, for the whoever's doing the data collection to understand whether they're logging into a remote computer that's sitting on their desk and operating from home, or whether they're actually got mobile devices that they bring in and they take home again with them.
Very interesting. Yeah. Look, it's good for us to hear about these, all the different sort of scenarios for it. And that's also why in the NABERS indicative system that we're going to pop into in a second, it is set up as computer rather than person, although that's sort of the default for it is a computer on. So if that's the situation, then you want to count that as a computer being on, even if the person is not physically there. But yeah, look, for every sort of normal and standard, there's as many variations on that. So there'll always be some ones that are a little bit trickier. So let's go through into estimating some ratings. Do we want to do any other Q&As now, or should we just get into an interactive?
Let's jump into it, I think, Zoe.
Let's jump into it. So if you haven't already got the NABERS website up and running, Emily has just dropped that in the sheet. I'm going to open that on my screen as well. What's your preference, friends? Do you want to see faces, or would you like me to have the screen up and run through an indicative rating? And is everyone kind of ready and prepared with some figures to run through the process?
I'm happy to supply my figures if you want to sort of use those to come up with our rating.
Alex, would you like to screen share and then you do the driving, and we can interrupt you and ask you questions?
Yeah, if that's what you want.
Yeah, go for it. You grab the share button, and that would be really cool.
All right, I'll just see if I can pull up this. Which one is it? This. So I've got so many things open on my screen at the moment. I've got to find the right one. Is that the one? Nope.
Zoe, just while we're waiting, it's Roger here. Just on the instructions and summary sheet, there was A couple of questions there. One, how many computers are normally switched on when the tenancy is occupied, which I get, that makes sense. That's just what you've been discussing. The
Yeah.
second question is how many FTEs work from your tenancy? So in all of our tenancies
Yeah.
around the country.
Your ratings must be this one. Is that the one? Can you see that one, Anna?
Perfect.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So everyone who's got data at home, feel free to do some plugging in. And I guess let's just interrupt Alex if we've got questions about his, or if you have questions about your own data, pipe up and we'll answer them live.
All right. Well, basically, I'll do the energy rating office. We occupy the whole building. Obviously, that's the postcode. And
obviously, if you're just doing a tenancy at home, just click the tenancy rather than whole building.
Yep. So the floor space is about 1580 meters squared. Okay. How many hours per week? As I sort of mentioned, we're about 50, roughly normal building, normal operating hours. How many computers? Well, it's only corporate staff and day activity programs. There's only about 40 computers. The total energy usage for the year is 154,794 kilowatt hours. Sorry. The total percentage electricity is 0% green power. Natural gas usage for the 12 months was 714. And no diesel.
You might just have to put a 0 in that diesel number.
Okay, so calculate my rating. There you go, 4.5 stars.
So basically, once you've collected all the data, the estimate your rating actual process could not be easier, right? So I guess one of the main things in the conversation is really around what are those barriers to collecting that data in before. So hopefully we've answered a bunch of those questions. And for those who've plugged their own numbers in along, playing along at home, anyone have any errors or issues that they've encountered?
Yeah, I've just done it for our George Street tenancy, Zoe, and it's come up as an estimated energy rating of 6 stars.
Okay.
But we've just had our neighbours rating formally done, and it came in at 4.5 stars. So I'm going to have to double check what was the data that we gave to the assessor and verify that. So either we've given them different data to what I've just put in, or there's something weird going on with somebody's algorithm somewhere along the line.
Yeah, there could be an issue somewhere along the way. There could be different sets of data.
Yeah.
The other thing, just to be really clear on, is that an estimate your rating is not nowhere near. It's a good measure. It's a really, really useful measure. It's a good way to give you, and if you click that, Alex, if you want to click that more details button underneath your star rating result there, you'll get a bunch of information on, your annualized figures. Those are all really useful things to have. Let's flick back to the page. It is not as accurate and not as a detailed inquiry on your performance as having an accredited assessor come on board and check everything and potentially apply some of the exclusions that might be applicable to your space, or find some of the sort of bits and pieces in there. So I can't give you a specific answer on the difference between that, specifically for your tenancy, Roger, but we can have a look at it for sure. And flick me an email and let me know how it goes if you've replugged your numbers. But really, the accredited assessor is looking at a whole bunch of additional information. This is really a high level, get a gist of what the performance looks like. And that's why the indicative rating can't be published. It's not something that you can publicize. It's definitely something that you use for that conversation with CitySwitch. It's really useful to do that baselining and sort of, what is our annual, you can see there, you've got your annual emissions figure calculated, bit of the intensity information, but it is a snapshot rather than a detailed audit. So the star rating result can vary depending on a range of different things. So when we develop these tools, we're looking at whole bunch of different measures across the office and then finding the most statistically impactful ones. And then when we're doing this sort of self-estimate tool, it's obviously just picking those most important pieces of data to crunch, but it's nowhere near the sort of full calculation that an accredited rating goes through.
So I can see that, sorry, just one other quick question. I can see that on Alex's screen there is the energy intensity is 353 for his tenancy, and that's given him 4.5. According to my screen I've just run, mine is 23, so 1/15 of his, and that's given me the 6 star. So is there a direct I think I may have sent you an email about this the other day. So just trying to understand, how does that mean that a 6-star tenancy uses 1/15 on average the energy that a 4.5-star tenancy might use? Is it that direct a comparison?
It's not that direct a comparison because it's looking at a bunch of other things. So the star rating itself is benchmarking you against other similar sites that have the same kind of attributes and things in them. So it's not a pure percentage of energy consumed. Yes, it's a little bit more of a complex answer. Sorry. And I'll reply to your email, Roger.
No problem. That's fine.
Sorry, can I just point out before we flick to those other final questions, the scope 1 and 2 emissions that are pulled up by this calculator, so that second line there, that can be used in, as an estimate of where your office emissions are at.
Yeah, so the emissions themselves, all of those annualized figures, they come directly from the consumption figures. So that, that's where the estimate tool is really useful for your baselining. It's really useful for you to pull those figures into performance. It's the star rating itself that's the estimated part, because that's where an accredited NABERS rating would be benchmarking you in a much more sort of sophisticated way against other ratings like yours. So that's that comparison, and that's what the star rating is useful for. How do I compare to other buildings? But this calculation, all of those are consumption figures, so those are direct.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. I am aware of the time. We've probably only got about 4 minutes left. So is it okay if we maybe move on to the Q&A with the... So I'll share my screen. Alex, thank you so much for sharing your screen. That was really quite informative. Let's make sure. Yep. So everyone can see that.
Yep.
So we've got the first question here. Are there new NABERS ratings coming up for warehouses?
So was that question, are there new ratings coming up after warehouses? Because we've just launched our warehouses and cold stores tool, and that's out now. Ratings are coming through. So I wasn't quite sure what the context of the question was. Is the person who asked online? Can we have a bit of clarification on that?
I think that was Jason, who's not here, but I can pass that on and let him know that he can access that rating already.
So answer is yes, we've got warehouses and cold stores ratings. That's in market now, and it's really exciting to see those start to come through. And we do have other sectors that we're rolling out to after that. We've got a retail tool that we'll be developing over the next little bit. Just done the call out for participants in the advisory panel for that. So we're calling out for people who have retail tenancies to be involved in the development of the tool and provide data so we can get that benchmark set up.
Yep, fantastic. I know there's definitely a lot of signatories that will like that there's a warehouse rating now. Now, next question. I think we may have just briefly gone over it, but is there a mathematical link between NABERS star ratings and energy consumption?
That was my question.
Yeah.
There we go. I submitted that one.
So there's definitely a massive mathematical link, but it is not a direct star rating to consumption. That, as I said before, it's a much bigger algorithm taking into account a whole bunch of different measures. So if you're keen to sort of look under the hood a little bit more of NABERS and how it works, our essentials, which is basically if you're becoming an assessor, it's the 101 course, and that is free to do on the website, on the NABERS website. So if you do want to kind of see a little bit more about how it works, I really encourage you to go and do that essentials course. It is, as I said, it's kind of aimed for people who are going to become assessors, but that's really useful as customers of NABERS as well.
Great. Fantastic. I'll definitely pass that on to some signatories as well. We've got another question. I am interested in a detailed energy audit for our office so we can identify ways to reduce energy consumption. Will the audit conducted as part of the NABERS tenancy provide sufficient detail to manage energy use?
This is an excellent question, and it is something that that I think we need to think about when you're getting a NABERS rating. If you are getting an accredited assessor to come on board, they're a consultant, they're a professional consultant. You need to ask them for what you want. So the standard NABERS rating is come, take all of those measurements, work with you to find out where that data is, and push out an accredited certification, like the NABERS certificate. And for a lot of customers, that might be all they need and want. They might have a whole sustainability team, a bunch of building engineers, facilities managers who are already all across all the changes they want, and they just want that certification of performance. So if you want an audit with a report, an action plan, some of those low-hanging fruit, the assessor knows this information. They'll have part of their business, at least, that does that work, but you need to ask for it at the point where you're basically contracting them to come and do that work, and be clear about kind of what you need and maybe a bit about what you don't know already. That's my biggest piece of advice. When you're having the first conversation with the assessor, be really clear about what you want. And if you're thinking about contracting them to do a couple of years of ratings, and that might be the way your business wants to set it up, maybe you want a more detailed action plan at the start, and then kind of talk to them about, do you want some costings involved in that? Do you want some return on investment calculations in that, so that that's easier for you to make an internal business case? But there are a lot of assessors who, if you just say, we want a NABERS rating, then they may just give you a quote for just the certification. But they're really great resources. They know a lot about buildings and how they run. So tell them that you want more info, and they'll build that into the quote they give you.
Great, thanks, Zoe. And last question, which you kind of touched on before.
Let's call it covered. Yep. It's really useful to get a tenancy rating because it's about your performance.
Great, thank you so much. All right.
Alex, you had your hand up. Was that a question?
Oh, just a quick question about green energy and the impact that has on your the star rating. The reason I'm asking, we're just about to renew our electricity contracts with the suppliers or with the retailers. And one of the options we're looking at is obviously green energy. We have a big project going on here, which I'll talk to Anna about at a later date. But what sort of percentage, what sort of impact does the green energy have on your star rating? And what sort of percentages are we looking at to obviously increase the stars?
So that's a great question. At the moment, it does have an impact on the star rating result. So as you saw, one of the questions in the indicative tool was to asking you what your percentage of green power is. And the best way to get an answer for your site is to plug that in and play around with the impact. But one of the little plugs that I made at the start of my presentation was about this renewable energy indicator change. That'll come into play next year, and that is going to have the biggest impact on purchasing green power specifically to get an increase in your star rating. We went out and consulted really widely with the community on this and with the industry, and what everyone said was that they wanted better recognition of all the different types of renewable energy that are being used, and so power purchase agreements, on-site solar, etc. So the shift will now go to a system where rather than have a star rating with green power and a star rating without green power, we're just going to have the star rating, and then we're going to have the renewable energy indicator, which will be a percentage breakdown of all your different sources of renewable energy. That's a much better representation and a much better way to kind of have that information certified. So we'll have, we're planning new year, some info sessions on that for a bunch of all the sort of technical information. But for now, if you were getting an accredited rating, this month, you can play around with plugging that into the indicative tool and see what the change would be. but please keep an eye out for that renewable energy indicator date in the new year.
Great, thanks,
Thank you.
Zoe. I'm going to have to wrap it up there. Again, thank you, Zoe, so much for taking us through that. I know I learned a lot along the way, and I'm sure our signatories did as well. So thank you so much. So just quickly wrapping up, register for upcoming events on our website. If you haven't already, complete the Net Zero Pathway Acknowledgement link form, through the link on our website, or we would have emailed it to you. And it's time to get started on measuring those baseline emissions. So if you have any further questions, just reach out to us at info@CitySwitch or myself or Emily. And before you leave, we have one last poll, one poll to do. After today's session, did you feel confident to do an indicative, do you feel confident to do an indicative NABERS rating? So Emily will just pop that up. There are 5 thumbs up. Choosing 5 thumbs up is very confident. So thanks again, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks for having me, everyone, and great to see you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Zoe. Thanks,
Zoe.
Annie.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone,
you.
for coming.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, Tarina.